The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. My name is Kimberly Gonzalez. I am an application engineer with Progression Technologies, and I will be presenting for you today in this webinar, What's New in SolidWorks 2015 for Drawings. There are several different things that they've made some enhancements or changes on. I have a list of them here. They've added drawing zones. They've added some new tools or editing features for center marks and center lines. There are some dimension enhancements, some tools to use for view displays, layers, notes, tables, sheet formats, and some of the performance option locations have been changed. I'll show you that. We're going to start with drawing zones. Drawing zones are used to define the drawing sheet zones, and you can put labels on them to locate where, say, a section or a detail view would be, and those views can also be on a totally different sheet, so it would make it hard to find sometimes, so you can put labels on those and tell it what sheet and what zone it is in. I'm going to take a look at how you can do that. So we're in a drawing here. I have some views already put in a little section view. First thing I'm going to do is tell you how to define your zones. First, we're going to go into Edit Sheet Format. And then from there, I'm going to go to the Properties. We get the dialog that comes up. This used to be only sheet properties, but now we have an extra tab called Zone Parameters. From here, you can come in and tell it how many rows or columns. It will default to the correct rows and columns according to your sheet size that you're using, but you could change it. If you leave this at sheet and you say OK, and then we come in and we go back to Edit Sheet. I still have to turn these on. They're not going to show yet until I turn them on. And to turn these on, I go to View. And down here, there are zone lines. I have to activate that. And you notice that we have the zone lines now. When we set our properties to show sheets, it lines up nicely with our little sheet marks here. So let's back up a minute and I'll show you the margins. I like the sheet option better. So if I set this to margins, what it's going to do is center these zones based off of the margins of the sheet rather than on the markings here of the actual sheet. So I'd rather leave that set to sheet, but it's up to you. Those are your options available. Now once we have our zone lines in here, we have our sheet set up to use zones and we show the zone lines. How do we show notes or things to indicate what zones things are in? On a note, I have a note here, I just put in a note and had zone typed in already. But if I go in and double click and edit that note, and I come over here to the end of it, I put a space. In the property manager of that note, there is a new tool over here called Add Zone. And then I can select from this drop-down zone, which will give me the row and the column, or I can tell it to do just the column or just the row. So if I do zone, it's the row and the column. So that labels it properly there for me. Tells me what zone this is in. It's in B4. Now if I come over here on item balloons, I can add those to the balloons as well. I double click that item balloon. I have to change I'll select on the balloon. I have to change this balloon text here from item number to text. Then when I edit that text, I have the same parameters there. I can come in and do add a zone and do the same thing there. And if I'd like, I can go a little further. If I don't like it right next to each other, a bunch of numbers, I can put it down below it. Now if I have actual views here, my section view, and I want to label the section view, I want to put a label over here to tell where the parent, the cutting plane line of this section is over here and vice versa, I have to do this a little different. I'm going to go into Insert, Annotations, and there is a tool down at the bottom called Location Label. And it tells me choose a section view, detail view, auxiliary view, and so forth to place the location label. So I'm going to select this view over here. I do have some options here. I can change the style and how many characters fit in it. What's the upper text going to show and what's the lower text going to show. And you see I get a nice label there. So the cutting plane line is in Sheet 1, Zone A4. So Zone A4. That's where the cutting plane line is. If I select the cutting plane line and go back and do the same method, Insert, Annotations, Location Label, it tells me where the view is. It's on Sheet 1 in Zone A2. And this works if this view is placed on a totally different sheet. It would tell you Sheet 2 over here, or Sheet 3, wherever it is. So that's really nice. You don't have to hunt for your views anymore. Okay, let's move on. We're going to look at center marks now and center lines. You can add to a center mark set. So if you have a bolt hole circle of holes and you put center marks on all of them, something happened and a center mark got deleted, you can add to it. And then you can also now attach annotation leaders to your center lines to add notes to it. You couldn't do that before. So let's go and take a look at that. So I've already created a little view here, and for whatever reason this center mark is missing from this circle here. So I want to go in, I don't want to have to delete everything and start all over. I want to go and add a center mark to this center mark set. So what I do is I just right mouse button a center mark that's there, and I select Add to Center Mark Set. And then I go and select the circle I want to add it to. And without having to redo everything now, I can just update that one. Now some of these may seem pretty simple, but anything to help save time doing drawings is a big benefit. And also for center lines, when you're doing notes, you can now attach leaders to it. You see when I hover over that center line, it highlights. You weren't able to do that before. I can actually attach my note to a center line and put a note on there. So little things, but they'll probably make your life a lot easier when you're trying to detail out your drawings. Okay. Now the next one are some changes or enhancements to dimensions. They have enhanced the rounding options for decimal placement, for tolerancing, and they've added some enhancements for angle dimensions. So the first one for decimal rounding, I have this dimension placed here. We're going to take a look at it. When we go into options now, and we go to document properties, units, there is a new section at the bottom for decimal rounding. The default is round half away from 0. And when I come over here and I select to do the precision I'm going to change it from 3 to 1, you see it follows the standard rounding practices. This was 1.154, so it rounded it up to, when I did 1 decimal place, to 5.2. Okay, let's go and take a look at a couple of the other options. If I use round half towards 0, I'm going to set this to 1 decimal place. It just keeps it doesn't round up if that second number is a 5. 5 or higher. Next option that we can use is round half to even. So what this is going to do is round this up to the next even number. So if I go here and I go to 1 decimal places, it's going to round it up to 0.25. And I don't have an example, but what would happen, say if I had 5.254, it would keep it at 2. It would keep it at the nearest even number. It wouldn't round it up to a 3 if it was 254. So I'm keeping it to the half even. So you can come in here and play around with these later and get a better feel for how these work. There is also a truncate without rounding. And if I do this, it's just not going to round up. It's just going to make it 1 decimal place without worrying about rounding anything. Okay. Now one last thing on the decimal places rounding. We do have an option down at the bottom that is checked to only apply rounding method to dimensions. Of course, if this is checked, which is the default, it only applies rounding to dimensional items. If that is unchecked, it will apply this to any other numeric display, including like the mass properties dialog. It will apply this rounding that you selected to other numeric values within the program. But if it's checked, it's only to dimensional values. Okay. Now they have the tolerancing rounding. What this does is allow you to set limits of the secondary unit's values to fit within the tolerance range of the rounded primary unit. So sometimes when you round, if it rounds up or down too much, and you actually do a conversion of it, it doesn't match the primary units anymore. So there's a setting here that's going to keep that from happening. Okay? So if I go into options, document properties, dimensions, down at the bottom there is a tolerance button. And there's this option here for inward rounding of secondary unit tolerance extents. If I leave it unchecked, the low end of the secondary unit's tolerance is smaller than the rounded primary tolerance than it is rounded up. So if the low end of the secondary unit's tolerance is smaller than the rounded primary tolerance, then it rounds up. And if I check it, so this is unchecked, so if I check it, the high end of the secondary unit's tolerance is larger than the rounded primary tolerance, then it rounds down. And again, this keeps it so when it converts over, it stays within the proper conversion. Because if it rounds up or down too much, it won't convert correctly. So if I check this, it should be rounding different. There are help topics on this to help better explain this. If you forget about this one later, it's not coming up for me on my internet, but if you go to the help topic, there should be an internet help page that will come up, and it'll explain in more detail some of these items here. Okay, angle dimensions. If you want to place an angle along an imaginary line, I want to dimension this angle, but I don't have anything horizontal or vertical here to dimension it to. All I have to do is go to Smart Dimension. And I come over here and I pick the line that I want to dimension an angle for, and then I pick a point, a vertex. And I now get, what's new is I get this little symbol here with the different directional arrows, and I can pick one of those to dimension to. It says that this is my imaginary line, the additional line that I'm going to dimension to. And you see I've got a dimension now for the angle, even though I don't have a horizontal line here to dimension to. So that's really nice. Then the other thing is I have an option here. If I take this dimension here, I can flip this angle to its vertical opposite angle. So if I right mouse button on that dimension and I go to, let me get out of dimensions. So right mouse button on it and I go to display options, there's this option here to create a vertically opposite angle. Okay? So it created the vertically opposite angle of the original. And then I have this one. There's another option in there. If I use this one to just demonstrate that, I can do an exemplementary angle. So it's a quick little flip to change those to better display it to suit my needs. And then we have another one. Let me see if I can do it off of these two. We'll do some sketch lines here. If I have two separate lines that are collinear to each other, in line with each other, I should be able to come in now and pick both of those and do a 180-degree angle between them. Sorry, I just canceled out of that. Let me go back. But I can create a, between two separate lines, I can do a 180-degree dimension between them. Now the next thing are a couple changes, additions, and changes to views. There is a new tool that will allow me to zoom to sheet rather than zoom to fit, and there has been a change in a tool. The old tool known as Display Only Cut Faces, which you see down here in the old 2014 Property Manager, has now been changed to Slice Section. It's the same tool, they've just changed the name of it. So we have a view here. I'm going to do a detail view, and I'm going to just put it off the page and show you the difference between Zoom to Fit. It zooms and fits in all the views that are on your drawing here, even if it's outside of the sheet. And they have this new tool now, Zoom to Sheet. It will zoom in and only show the sheet. It doesn't matter if anything's off the sheet. It won't display that, represent it. It'll zoom to sheet. You don't have to do a zoom to fit, and if you only want the sheet, you don't have to do a window anymore. You have this nice, and I don't think this comes in by default. You would have to go in and add this tool to your set, but it's a nice little feature. Now when we're doing section views, that tool that's been changed, Display Only Cut Faces has now been changed to Slice Section. This option here, Slice Section, you see what it's doing. I'm doing a section line on the transition, and it's showing what it should. It's showing the transition, this little round piece with the handle behind it, and the views being displayed properly. But I only want to show the transition, so I would Slice Section, and I only get what the cutting plane line is touching. Display Only Cut Faces is now Slice Section. Okay. Layers. You are now able to set things to a certain layer and then tell it to omit that from your print. You'll still see it in the drawing, but it will be omitted from the print. So say I'm going to pick this shaft here, and I'm going to set that to the shaft layer. And you see it in all three views, but I don't want that to print. I need it to be there to represent for just general purposes, but I don't want it to print. So I come over here to the Layers Properties, down in the bottom right, and I now have this column for printing. I can tell it for the shaft layer to not print. So I've already suppressed this. So the shaft, anything on the shaft layer will not print. So when I come over here to print, and I do a print preview, you don't see the shaft. That's pretty nice. This will be to paper prints, or if you print to PDF, it won't display those layers that are turned off. Now for notes, they've added an enhanced paragraph properties and editing dialog, if you will, for some of your text options. And now you can do leaders that are splined, so you can do little curving little lines for your notes. So if you have a note placed up here, and if I double click it, you get the editing toolbar, like you always have seen for your notes, but I have this additional tool for paragraph properties. And it will allow me to change the indentation. Cancel all this. I only want to highlight. Don't want to highlight everything. Let's see what we're getting here. not letting me highlight. But you can change your indentation for the first line. This is the indentation for the overall, and then you can say increment. You can change this, and when you use the increase, decrease indent or increase it, it does it by the increment that you set up here. I can come over here and tell it to give me a numbering list or a bulleted list. If I were able to highlight this, for some reason I can't. But you have these options for paragraph spacing and so forth. This is really nice. I know before when you did list, if you just did a return, if you typed in a 1 and typed in your note and did a return, it would automatically do number 2 and 3 and so forth. But now you can add bullets to it, so that's really nice. And then if you do a note, we have this new option here to do a spline leader. So I can add a note to something and place a little curvy leader line to it. When I go in and edit it, I can actually change that. I can drag this up to lengthen it, and I have some little flexibility here to change that curve. Okay, the next thing is tables. We're now able to apply a horizontal auto split, and this can be saved with the VOM template now. So you can bring in a VOM that's automatically split. So if I have this VOM and I select here, say on row 4, I right click, and I'm going to tell it to horizontal auto split. I now get this new dialog box that comes up, and it tells me I can apply this continuously. And I want to leave it at horizontal, and I can apply that, and it splits my table. Let me come back and change a setting here. Do that over. Split horizontal. I want to tell it how many rows to keep in the additional one. So I'm going to say 4 and then continuously. There. So now I still have all of my items. So I have a split table. So I could save this now in my template, my VOM template, and that new VOM will come in split automatically. Some people have very long VOMs and they split them between sheet 1 and 2 and so forth. So if you do that quite often, you can go ahead and save your template and you don't have to go through this process every time. There's been 3 sheet formats that have been added to the standard set that you get with SolidWorks. We now have an F-size ANSI, and we have the AO for the different standards over here. So we have some additions to the sheet formats. And then the last thing is that there have been some changes to the locations of performance options. They've just gone down a level here. You see the old location, which I'll show you, stops at drawings, but then they've taken them out of there and put them down one more level. Nothing too drastic here, but if we go to options, and in the system options, drawings, those options used to be here amongst the whole list. They have now added a performance section. Okay? Separated those out. Okay, well that's the end of the webinar for today. If you have any questions for us later after today's webinar, you can always contact me at kim@progressiontech.com, or you can contact the main support@progressiontech.com, or extension 2 at our main number. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great weekend.